Hello and welcome to another episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. It is 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time here on a Wednesday, which means that we are live and we are here with All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey, a part of the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. Please make sure you are subscribed to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel if you are watching this. You can also find the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show via podcast on Spotify or wherever you do listen to your podcast episodes. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Looks like our live stream might have cut in and out there for a second, but we are good to go now. Again, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. Obviously, there is plenty to talk about this week because we are leading up to the Final Four. Um, let's see, we have UConn against Alabama and Purdue against NC State, just as everybody would have predicted before March Madness began. But that's why it is madness. There's always a little something that you don't expect. And this year, certainly, the NC State Wolfpack making the run that they did to the Final Four is one of the biggest talking points here as we lead up to all of the fun and festivities in Phoenix this year. I am not at the Final Four this time around, but hope everybody's having a great time out there in what is hopefully sunny and warm Phoenix, Arizona. It is currently not sunny and not warm here in Richmond, Indiana, where I am recording in the home studio. But as we let some people trickle in here, a few of the topics that we'll be covering today, obviously previewing the Final Four a little bit, though I have already done that quite a bit on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show. So go make sure you check that out as well if you have not listened to Monday's episode there. We're going to talk about the transfer portal a little bit as well, some of the names that I like in the portal and how things are going here as that scene doesn't just heat up, but kind of stays hot as it has since the day that it went live a couple of weeks ago. And then we're going to finish with a couple of notes and thoughts and hypotheses about building a championship roster. That's been sort of a hot topic here with the lead up to the Final Four. Is the day of the freshmen gone and dead? Is it time to build through the portal? Do you have to have homegrown talent in terms of letting guys get older within your program, not just outside of it via the portal, or can you still win with some younger guys? And we'll dive into all that. If you are watching live, please feel free to fire away in the chat with a question, anything Final Four, transfer portal, college basketball in general related. We will be answering those questions throughout today's episode. I have gotten the link tweeted out now, so let's go ahead and dive on in. Obviously, again, as I said, it's Final Four week. We are 72 plus hours away from tip off there in Phoenix, so we will be talking about those games. And to me, the Final Four is about storylines, especially with these teams. And we'll be talking about that today. You got to start with UConn and how dominant they have been on this run. The defending national champions, and they have not missed a beat. They've now won 11 straight games. Heck, they've won like 24 of their last 25 games, dating back to the beginning of Big East play. Just a dominant season from them. And the way they've gotten here to the Final Four is extraordinarily impressive. I mean, blowing the doors off of Stetson, uh, a little bit tighter, but still, you beat Northwestern by 17. You blow the absolute doors off of San Diego State. Then you go on a 30-0 run at one point in the Elite Eight to beat Illinois. So, I've already talked about it this week, but I don't know for sure. I would need to check with, my guy, Evan Miyakawa, or, some people like that of, has there been a 30-0 run this season? There probably has, like if, but still, you would have expected that to be UConn against Stetson in the first round. Or honestly, you wouldn't expect it in the NCAA tournament. You'd expected it, let's go back and say UConn played Stonehill. UConn played Stonehill the second game of the season. I wouldn't have been shocked necessarily if there was a third. Well, I still would have been pretty shocked, but I could understand if there's a 30-0 run in that game. But to have a 30-0 run against a top 10 probably team in the country in Illinois in the stinking Elite Eight, playing to go to the Final Four, just off the charts. what Coach Bobby Hurley, Coach Danny Hurley, and the Huskies have done this season. Donovan Clingan has been excellent in some of the Huskies' biggest games of late. Cam Spencer continues to be one of the most important transfer portal additions in the country this season with what he brings to the perimeter for this UConn team. But it's going to be really interesting of how they can match up with this Alabama team that's playing very, very well in their own right. To me, the scary thing, if I'm a UConn fan, and I said this to one of my friends this week in terms of these two games, I look at it like this. If Purdue plays really well and NC State plays really well against each other, Purdue wins the game by probably 10 points or so. If both teams play really well, Purdue probably wins by about 10. If UConn plays really well and Alabama plays really well, there's actually a world where Alabama wins the game. Not necessarily because they're just in a vacuum better than the Huskies, but because of the way that they play, because they could come out and play really well and make 16 threes. We've seen it. We've seen it this tournament, even. And honestly, they've needed it to some extent. And that's something that maybe to go the other way would give me some hope as a Connecticut fan is Alabama's had to be pretty darn good to get here. Look all the way back to their first round game against Charleston, 109 to 96. They have 96 points to Charleston, obviously coached by Pat Kelsey, who's now at Louisville. In that game, Alabama goes 13 of 23 from three-point range to win the game. They're one of the best three-point shooting teams in the country. 13 to 30 of 23 still obviously, well, man, that's 56 plus percent. And let's say they go 12 of 23, still a very good percentage. They might lose the game if they shoot, or sorry, if they go like 10 of 23, they might lose the game instead of going 13 of 23. Then Grand Canyon, that was a rock fight. We'll kind of throw that one out. That was a different game. But then against North Carolina, 89-87, they make 11 threes in that game, once again above their average. If they only make 10 instead of 11, they lose the game most likely. Against Clemson, 89-82, they make 16 of 36 threes, 44.4%. If they make 13, 14, still a good percentage, but they might lose the game. So they've had to be pretty darn close to perfect from beyond the arc to get to this point. Can they be close to perfect against UConn? Yeah, maybe, because Mark Sears is really good and these other guys are really good for them, but it's going to get a heck of a lot harder. Travis in the chat says, I don't think they win if they make only 16 teams. Well, you very well might be right, because obviously UConn is really, really good offensively as well. I mean, Cam Spencer can match some of what they're doing. Alex Carabin, all these guys can match some of the firepower. Now, I still think that when it comes down to it, Alabama, plays at a little bit of a different pace and probably going to jack up more threes than UConn will. But I guess my point is that Alabama's needed to be so darn good from 3-point range, even to reach, heck, to win the first round, let alone to get to this point now. So can you really expect a fifth game of shooting 43 plus percent, making double-digit threes against a team as good as UConn? I'm not sure I would want to sit here and predict that. But also my point being that again, there's a world where both of these teams play pretty well and it still goes Alabama's way because of that style of play, because of the way they shoot the basketball. They kind of always have a chance because of what they do. Now, in the other game, Purdue and NC State, I've said it over the course of this past week or so, really even before the second weekend of the NCAA tournament, and certainly now coming out of Sunday's win against Duke. As we sit here now, 11 seed NC State in the Final Four, playing number 1 seed Purdue. To me, the oddity at this point, kind of the surprising outcome, it's no longer necessarily NC State making the Final Four. It's how in the heck did this team only win 17 games, I believe it was, in the regular season? How in the heck did this team go 9-11? They finished under 500 in the ACC in the regular season. How in the world in a down ACC, which maybe wasn't as down, and we saw Clemson make the Elite Eight. We obviously still have NC State playing. We had Duke make the Elite Eight. But how did this team only go 9-11? So to me, we've gotten to a point where when I watch them play, I'm not going to say they look like every Final Four team ever, but they look like they belong. DJ Horn, DJ Burns, those two guys are studs, and they are playing at an extremely high level, as is the rest of their team. Coach Kevin Keats has not just saved his job; he's locked in extensions. He's had just an outstanding run here. Obviously, winning 5 games in 5 days to even make the stinking tournament, and then winning 4 over the course of 2 weeks to get to Phoenix in the Final Four. But I I do think it's interesting how they've almost kind of flipped the narrative where I don't really think that what they're doing now is as surprising as what in the world happened throughout the entire regular season. So I think that they're probably going to meet their match here with Purdue. Just the I know, and one of them's in the chat now, in Jack Davidson, but probably more so his brother Eric. But there's people who don't like Zach Edey, and I understand that it's not the flashiest style of play. He is 7'4", and sometimes it's a little lumbering around the basket. But I think it's you still have to we can't get to a point where we take his greatness for granted because yes, he's 7'4". Yes, he seemingly puts up 30 and 15 every time he wakes up out of bed, but he's really darn good. And I like the way he's finished under the basket, especially in that last game. Like he had a couple of tough catches and finishes that he doesn't always even make. I just think that we're watching a guy that's one of the better players that we've seen in a decade, 2 decades, and yes, I can understand that it's not as sexy to watch as some other players, but gosh, he's still so darn good and so darn dominant. It'll be interesting to see now on the defensive end. Can DJ Burns' passing ability, can the way he move around a little bit, will that make it more difficult for Edey? And then can DJ Horn sit out there and that guy's made over 100 threes this season now. But I think that you're seeing enough from Purdue's backcourt. Braden Smith to me has solidified himself as one of the best point guards in college basketball at this point. Fletcher Lawyer, a little bit more up and down, but he's had certainly good games. I think Lance Jones has been a huge addition for Coach Matt Painter and the Boilermakers this year. So I feel like we are going to hopefully get treated to the matchup that I feel like we all deserve after this college basketball season, to watch Donovan Clingan and Zach Edey go at it, to watch UConn and Purdue, two of the best teams since day one of this season. I think we will get treated to that, and I sort of hope that we do. And I'll have more kind of deep dive thoughts into the specific matchups on Friday's episode of the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show. But I just wanted to touch on some of those thoughts for now. Let's turn our attention to the transfer portal and Jack Davidson, best player that I ever coached at Wabash College, all-time leading scorer at Wabash, former professional basketball player as well. He has a question. Brandon, what are your thoughts on Indiana's standing in the transfer portal? Well, I'm sure you've seen this, but Tony Perkins, the Lawrence North grad, he was runner-up for Mr. Basketball in what that would have been either 2019 or 2020. He just cut his list of 6 schools. I think I can rattle this off the top of my head, to Arkansas, Indiana, Missouri, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, and Oregon. So he's cut his list to 6 schools. I think he is one with some of his two-way ability. Now, I'm sure there's some Indiana fans that wish he shot it better, but still, he's a guy that has scored it, obviously, in the Big Ten at a high level, averaged over 14 points a game, rebounds it pretty well from the perimeter. He's a very, very good defender with his length. I think that he would be, a great take for the Hoosiers, and it seems like they're in a pretty good spot with him there. I really like the guard Connor Hickman from Bradley as well. He's a Bloomington guy that I just saw the comment from Travis there. You didn't have to throw shade on live about Jack being the best player. Well, yeah, we have 2 of probably the 6 best players I ever coached in the chat right now. But yeah, Travis, you're up there too. Travis, you gave me the best moment of my coaching career by beating Wisconsin Whitewater, but I think even you would admit that Jack Davidson, slightly better basketball player. But well, Bernard's still ahead of you, Trav. But I think that Tony Perkins and Connor Hickman, who's a Bloomington native, I think that those guys can certainly help the Hoosiers be better this season. I don't know what necessarily other, like those are obviously the in-state guys that I think they can get. And to me, that's part of it. I saw somebody post about this on Twitter recently too about like here's Purdue playing for a national championship with a bunch of these dudes from Indiana. You have Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer playing big roles in the backcourt for 2 years now. You have Mason Gillis, who's an important piece. I know Caleb First hasn't played as much lately, but he's been a piece for them off the bench. Obviously, Trey Kaufman-Renn in the starting lineup as well. And then, you know, historically, you would like to think that some of these guys would be playing for Indiana. Well, here you have Tony Perkins, who's had an outstanding career at Iowa. Like, probably would have been nice to have him in Bloomington for the last 4 years. Well, maybe you can at least get 1 year out of him here. So I like where they stand with some of these guys. I think that Indiana's NIL situation is honestly good enough where they'll be able to land some of these dudes, especially somebody like Connor Hickman, who probably isn't going to have the, or I mean, he's not coming from a place where he probably was getting as much money. So like whatever they can throw at him, especially being a local kid, and I mean his skill level, and you guys in the chat know this. Like I think his skill level is what IU has been missing recently as a guy that can really dribble, pass, and shoot. And Tony Perkins is just that level of player also that that defensively, especially that could help some things for the Hoosiers. So I do like where they're at overall. I just mentioned Indiana's NIL situation, but it's kind of crazy where we are with the transfer portal, where it just becomes this free agency bidding war, and something that I think does sort of need to be done about it, because like even in professional sports, you don't have free agency every season for every player. Now, obviously, there's always free agency happening, but you're locked into a 2-year deal, 3-year deal, 4-year deal, 5-year deal, whatever. And we just don't have that now in college basketball. And I know my guy Daniel Poneman, who is a pretty well-respected agent now at this point, but other people listening to this might remember him as the Illinois high school basketball guy. That he was a big reason why I got into what I do in Indiana. Was him at a very young, I think we're actually similar ages, but he started doing his thing at like 16 over in Illinois. But he talked about how some of these NIL deals need to start being structured as like with buyouts in them. That okay, you're going to get $100,000 this year, then you're going to get $150,000 next year, and then as a junior you would get $175,000 or $200,000, whatever. And heck, you can even put incentives in there. But then also, if you transfer, then you have to give 50% of it back, or you have to pay $100,000 or whatever it may be, just to kind of de-incentivize some of this. And also, we need to get back to I'm probably a fan of the one-time transfer rule. There's no reason why you probably shouldn't be able to move around with some freedom. But it went into place as a one-time transfer rule. Well, we've just, thrown that completely to the curb at this point, where it's 2-time, 3-time, however many stinking times you want to transfer. It's just fair game at this point. And I think we need to get away from that a little bit, where it's just like, the way everybody kind of started testing the waters of the NBA draft. Now we do that with the transfer portal, where you just test the waters of the transfer portal every year with no repercussions. And to me, that's just not the way that we should necessarily be building things in college basketball. That's just my opinion. One of the bigger names to go into the portal yesterday was John L. Davis, another Indiana graduate, or not Indiana graduate, Indiana native from Gary 21st Century. Obviously, star player at Florida Atlantic over the last couple of years with their success there. I have to imagine that he is going to follow Coach Dusty May to Michigan, but certainly will be a highly sought after one. Yesterday, Coach Bill Self in Kansas landed Zeke Mayo from South Dakota State. He's an absolute stud, Summit League Player of the Year this year, high-level shooter, high-level scorer. Kansas has done a great job here of late. They landed him. I'm drawing a blank on who else they just got, but they got another high-level guy here recently. They got KJ Adams to return. They're probably, they're rumored to potentially be a favorite to get Liam McNeely, who decommitted or got out of his letter of intent from Indiana. So things are going very well this offseason after a disappointing year for the Kansas Jayhawks. Speaking of Kansas, they had an interesting story with AJ Storr. I don't know if anybody saw this on Twitter, but that he was the Wisconsin transfer that he wanted $1 million from Kansas and NIL. They offered him $750,000 and said take it or leave it, and he walked away. Actually, a little bit of Kentucky buzz there now for Storr, but I don't know if they're going to pony up that sort of money. But again, it's just crazy what some of these guys are commanding on what's essentially become the open market. And, you can't fault them if people are going to give it to them. And I, I, I don't have the answers, and this is probably a topic for a different show. This would be a good off-season topic for us to dive into, just, overall kind of where college basketball is at with NIL, transfer portal, et cetera. But some of the stuff's getting crazy. Another FAU guy, the Vlad Golden, he's in the portal. Again, you have to think that Michigan's going to clean up with some of these guys. Clifford Amori is another big one, transfer from Rutgers, tied to St. John's. That's kind of seems to be the leader there, but Kentucky's involved there as well, along with some other places. Just kind of scrolling through some of the names. We've already talked about Tony Perkins here. Um, Michi Johnson, he recently committed back to Ohio State. So he started at Ohio State, went and had a really good couple of seasons, especially this year for Coach Lamont Paris at South Carolina. He is back playing for Coach Diebler now at Ohio State. A couple of the favorites that I have that I want to talk about. Cade Tyson, the Belmont transfer, shot almost 47%, or 45%, excuse me, from three this year, almost 300 attempts over the last couple of years. 6'7" guy that comes from a well-coached winning program there at Belmont. I think he's going to be he's not a Dalton Connect guy. He's not that dynamic, but he can have a huge impact for some places this season. Interested to see what Jalen Blackman, another dynamic scorer from Stetson, ends up. You got the Harvard guy, Malik Mack, that's going to be highly sought after. I think Oklahoma has a couple high-level guys. Javian McMullen went in yesterday. Otega Owe, he's been in there as well as a real bruising two-way guy. He's a guy I love Kentucky to get involved with, but don't seem to be going that route. But just, some of the guys in the portal right now on Sunday, probably on KentuckySportsRadio.com, where all my writing stuff lives, part of the On3 Sports Network. I'm going to have my maybe top 50 or so transfers ranked in a post there. So be sure to be looking out for that. Want to end today with some thoughts just on building a roster, something that Kentucky fans certainly are locked into of late. Is the freshman class too big? Do we need to get older? How do you get older? Do you get older with your own guys? Do you get older via the transfer portal? What does it take to have a high-level championship caliber team? And I'm going to find a couple tweets here. The first one being from Justin Rowland, who runs Cats Illustrated, the Kentucky Rivals site. And it was a post from their message board, and it was breaking down the players in the Elite Eight. And I found this really interesting. Then I'm going to go to a tweet of my own from a week or so back. But so I'm guessing these. I don't know if this is entire rosters or rotation players or what, but this is from the Elite Eight again. There were 24 seniors, 4 juniors, 10 sophomores, and 2 freshmen that were. I guess let's see. That's 34. That's 40. So these would have been the starting fives of the 8 teams in the Elite Eight. That's what this guy was doing. Again, 24 seniors, 4 juniors, 10 sophomores, and only 2 freshmen were in the starting lineups for Elite Eight teams. There were 18 transfers total of the 40 starters. There were 16 fifth-year players out of those 40 starters. 12 of the top 13 scorers in the Elite Eight were seniors. And he finishes by saying the game has changed. Well, I don't even know so much if it's changed. It's kind of probably always been that way more than what we remember. I mean, and I'll talk about this in the post that I had from a week or so ago of how, aside from 2012 Kentucky and 2015 Duke, like nobody has really ever won with freshmen. But it is interesting to see now how, being old it seems to be so important. And I don't know that's really earth-shattering news to anybody, but it clearly matters at this point because teams just aren't winning by playing a bunch of freshmen. And you're seeing teams like Kentucky, that do still play a bunch of freshmen, and they're going to have success along the way, and they're going to have their high moments. But man, then you lose to Oakland, then you lose to St. Peter's, and Kentucky still had some older guys. I mean, Antonio Reeves was the best player on the floor for most of that. But here's my tweet again at B Ramsey KSR. Since the one and done rule was instituted in 2006, there have been 17 NCAA tournament champions. Obviously, nobody won it in 2020. On those 17 champions, there have been 28 first round picks, with 14 coming in the lottery. Here's the breakdown by class: 7 freshmen, 5 sophomores, 13 juniors, 3 seniors. But there's some important notes here. 5 of those 7 freshmen that were drafted from NCAA champions were on 2012 UK and 2015 Duke. 2006 Florida, 2010 Duke, and 2016 Villanova are the only people to win a championship without a first round pick. There hasn't been a freshman first round pick on a national champion since 2018, and there have been 31 total freshmen on those 17 championship teams that I deemed to be a rotation player. Now, obviously, some subjectivity to that, but I think we all pretty much know what a rotation player is constituted as. So, looking at it from that standpoint, there's less than 2 freshman rotation players on champions dating back to 2006 per year. And there does seem to be a common theme. Like, you need a draft pick. You need a first-round draft pick. Honestly, you pretty much need a lottery pick. Again, 14 lottery picks in 17 years here. But those guys aren't generally freshmen. A lot of those, and again, 13 of the 28 overall draft picks were juniors during this span. So getting older clearly is a big part of winning at the highest levels. Now, there is still something to be like, do you need to have guys get older within your own program, be freshmen, sophomores, juniors? Can you do it via the portal? Now, I think there's certainly a path to doing it in all of the ways, and a little bit of balance across the board in terms of the most talented guys are probably still going to be freshmen. If you get the top of the top guys from high school, those can be some of the most talented guys. Your Reed Shepherds, your Rod Dillinghams. But then those other dudes, I think, need to be older. Like your fifth guy probably shouldn't be a freshman. Your fifth guy probably should be an all-conference player from the MAC. and he's just going to be further ahead than DJ Wagner, Justin Edwards, guys, for example. Travis has a good point. Some of those older guys were probably only a lottery pick because of a great run. I think there's certainly something to be said for that. There's a little bit of a chicken or the egg discussion of, was I a lottery pick because I went? But I think that NBA teams probably try to not just fall into that gap of like, well, I'm going to draft this guy 11th overall because he had 6 good games in March and early April. I'm sure that happens some, and you just get a chance to see these guys more. But I don't know how many guys necessarily get picked in the lottery because of one great run. Now, yes, it absolutely helps, thinking back to some of the older guys in recent years that start to really emerge as first round picks, as lottery picks, as potential NBA guys. But, it seems like some of those decisions are kind of made over the course of their careers as a whole. But just to wrap things up, like I said, I think that it goes without saying that at this point, being old or being older is a key part to success, and that's going to bear out once again in this Final Four, where it's a bunch of older guys. Some of them are transfers, some of them are sort of homegrown older guys, and that's going to be what wins the championship again this year for either Alabama, Alabama, Connecticut, NC State, or Purdue. Thank you all for tuning in. Those of you that left comments, thank you for supporting and joining in on the conversation. It makes this a lot more fun when there's a little bit of interaction there. If you're watching this in the future and you have a question, please just drop it in the comments or find me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Again, if you're here, make sure you are subscribed to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. These all fired up episodes are every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show will be back on podcast Friday morning. So find it on Spotify or wherever you do listen. And then follow me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Hope you all have a great rest of your week. Make sure you tune into the show on Friday and enjoy the Final Four this weekend. Thanks for being here.